conference. My name is Mike Beach, and I am the Assistant Director of Education here at the Toledo Museum of Art. I'm sure many of you have already seen sessions where I stand up and introduce myself, so I apologize if any of this is redundant, but I'm sure the more you get to see me, the happier you will. That's very good. I want to welcome you to our session today titled Reading Without Words, an Integrated Approach to Literacy. It will feature a presentation by Kristen Harrison of the Curved House. It's a publishing and design firm based out of Berlin, Germany. We're excited to have everybody here, and I'm sure you've heard that numerous times, but we really do mean it. So I hope you're getting as much as you can out of each of these sessions. Again, some of this may be redundant, but there are a few clerical notes that I want to point out. Refreshments, water and coffee right here. Restrooms, very important. If you hang a right out here, head to the registration area. The restrooms are off of the registration area. I'm going to trust that by now you're all visually literate and will be able to distinguish which is the men's and which is the women's. Right? But that'll be the final test for me today. I also wanted to introduce our session steward, Nancy, over here. If in case of an emergency, fire, or other procedure, Nancy will have directions for us and help us get out of the room. I also wanted to point out there should be evaluations placed on each of the tables. If you could please make sure and fill out the evaluation before you leave the session today. I know our presenters will really appreciate your feedback. And one thing, just to remind you, because it gets lost at the top, if you could put down the session title. So that way when we're compiling the information, we know which session we're putting this information for. And again, cell phones, silence, turn off if you haven't already done so. Okay. Well, thank you again for your participation, and please join me in welcoming the stage.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here looking at so many familiar faces and my new friends who I've met this week. I've had an absolutely lovely time and also learned about a lot of amazing work that's going on that I didn't know about before. I'd like to say an enormous thanks to the IVLA and also to TMA for making me feel so welcome this week. And I also have to say that TMA has such an amazing group of people working for them, all very bright, passionate, tenacious people. And it's really energizing to be around that for even this short time. So I am a publisher, and I have always worked in publishing since I was straight out of school. I went straight into a work experience position and didn't really look back. I ended up doing an English literature degree and also did postgraduate studies in publishing and got my master's a few years ago in communications with a publishing focus. So it has always been my thing, and yet I am a very, very visual person and I'm a visual thinker. So for me, coming across visual literacy and learning about what it's all about was a really, I guess, important moment for me, because I was able to marry my two loves, my love for books, but also my love for visual culture, I suppose, and visual communication. And I guess if I'm thinking about why I've started to publish for children, it's because I see the relationship between books and images to be, you know, a beautiful thing, very symbiotic. And I think children, when they're taught to read, are often, there's a lot of emphasis on the text, and I think a lot of them find it difficult to engage with books, and they shut off at an early stage at a very critical point where they could be forming a positive relationship with books into the future. So for me, I'm motivated by, I suppose, helping kids and also adults see that there's other ways to enjoy books, that you don't have to be a conventional reader, you don't have to read a book a week, and that actually, you know, there's something about them that goes way beyond the words. So I want to share with you a slightly embarrassing story about how I came across visual literacy, but maybe it sort of gives you a bit of an insight into the way I approach things anyway. A few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was starting to develop the children's books that you see on your table in front of you. And I was at the point of, I had the concept and I had the people to work on it. I decided who I wanted to illustrate and write the books. And I knew structurally what I wanted the books to be. And I was starting to think about the marketing stuff around the books, so what the back cover would say and what I would be saying, how I would be articulating the books to, say, teachers and parents and people who might buy and use them. And I coined a term, which I thought I'd invented, called creative literacy. And I was extremely proud of myself, thinking I was very clever, and I found a way to articulate this relationship between the creative side of publishing and the text side of publishing. And I was telling an English language teacher about this, English as a second language, and she said she'd worked in Hong Kong for 20 years and taught Chinese students English, who obviously have they have already pictorial elements in their language, native language, so it was, you know, a natural transition for her to be teaching visually anyway. And she said, "Have you heard of visual literacy?" And I said, "No." And I could feel already, I could just feel it. So I went home and I Googled it, and of course my whole world opened up at that point. One of the first things I came across was Brian Kennedy's TEDx talk, which I hope a lot of you have watched, and that was a fantastic introduction to the concept. And then from there I just kept reading and reading and researching and looking. And there were two things that this, I guess, did for me at that point in time that were really significant. One is it allowed me to articulate what I was trying to do with my children's books and the approach to literacy, and it gave me a framework to understand what I was already doing instinctively, and I was bringing to that project a whole lot of publishing skill and experience, but I had no sort of, I suppose, academic framework for it, and I had no access before that point to other people who were thinking the way I was thinking. And the second thing it did was it allowed me to sort of, I suppose, respect my own intelligence in a different way, because I suddenly realised that there was actually a thing that was being articulated that I was good at. And I felt extremely empowered by that, and by understanding an element of my own ability that I hadn't discovered before. So that experience for me is, again, another motivator for why I want to be doing work that is working across text and visual literacy, and helping people to develop their skills in this kind of way, in a way that's empowering for them. So I'm very much at this point, this intersection between text and visuals, and I am definitely not on board with the idea that those two things need to be in opposition to each other. I think that you know, text and visuals have worked together beautifully to form the fabric of our language for gazillions of years, and so I don't think that necessarily asserting that visuals is going to sort of take over is a necessary thing. I don't actually think it's a positive thing. So I'm very much about how we can bring the two together. I wanted to start with a really quick little exercise and to show you a project that I've been working on in my adult publishing life, which is one half of myself as well. It's inspired by Joan Miro, who is, I nearly dropped dead when I saw this. It's actually in the gallery. This is a photo I took yesterday. And this is one of his artist books that he did with his surrealist mates in Paris. He produced about 250 of these, and they were collaborations with writer friends. And he really understood the way that text and imagery could work together to create something beautiful, but also to create something that extends the meaning of the work for both the writer and the artist. And I've always been a huge fan of artist books and a huge fan of his work. So a few years ago, I started thinking about how I could do something that celebrated the artist's book, brought artists and writers together. Also something that would be beautiful and that was in keeping with sort of traditional book design, which I think is the perfect art form in itself. And that was open and democratic, and that would invite people to collaborate and contribute. So I launched a website with a designer friend of mine, Pete Lewis, and an editor friend of mine, Preeti Taneja. And it's called Visual Verse, and you can find it at visualverse.org if you care to go and have a look. And what we do with this website is actually, I think the TMA has a similar thing here where you use artworks to inspire writing, so it's a similar thing. We put up an image once a month. I curate the site, and so I choose an image by usually artists no one's ever heard of, but ones that I like. And we invite 2 or 3 writers whose work we like, usually one of significance. Ali Smith is a major UK novelist, very amazing woman. And we ask them to write a piece 50 to 500 words long within an hour. So it's sort of like an instinctive writing exercise, kind of flash fiction. I don't know if you have that term over here. And we put it up on the site, and then we put that up on the first of the month, and then we open it up to any writer to contribute a piece. So you can go on and click the submit button up the top and fill out the form and put your piece in. The editor will go through them, check they're okay. We usually publish everything as long as it's not really bad or offensive or derogatory. But we do try to keep it sort of quite democratic. And what the feedback I've had from this, apart from the fact that we get 50 or 60 submissions a month and about 2,000 people visiting the site, which is pretty good because we don't really do anything with it. We just put it there and tweet about it a bit. But the lovely thing that's happened from this site is the artists have actually been really inspired by people's interactions with their work. And that's what's been really nice about it, to see the way people will interpret and I guess extend their work into the realm of text. So I thought we could just do a very quick exercise to warm up our brains. I'm going to show you an image by one of my very favourite contemporary artists, Rona Byrne. She's an Irish artist. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to write something in response to the image. And the idea is you do it. Does anyone know what automatic writing is? It's another surrealist idea, which is basically you put your pen on the paper and you just write, and don't stop writing. Just keep writing. Whatever you write is fine for 30 seconds, okay? So I'll show you an image, and I'll time you. Ready? Go. How'd you go? Anyone want to share? Do you want to share? Oh, go on, do.
Delving into the unknown, he stands on the precipice looking for his next step.
You have to write a visual verse sometime.
I will. I will go home and do it. No question.
Kristen, could you repeat that? We couldn't hear it back there.
Do you
Oh,
want to read it in the microphone?
I should read it? Yes, okay. Delving into the unknown, he stands on the precipice looking for his next step.
Beautiful.
And I should say that I have just gotten very involved with creative nonfiction, so this is,
Perfect.
and I encourage you all to.
Her brain is hot.
Yeah. This is a wonderful way to start.
It is, and that's actually an amazing image. This was taken in Iceland, and Rhoda did a project there. She went and did a kind of group artist project, and she made the cloak using a really old traditional Icelandic way of making blankets and things, where they all stand on it and then squash it down and stretch it out. So how many of you wrote something about the colours? And how many wrote something about the scene itself, or the man, or what you felt might be happening with him? And did anyone write anything completely unrelated that it just reminded you of? Good. I think this is one of the things that I find magical about the relationship between images and words, and how we can express one, you know, between the other, is that there are so many ways to look at an image, and there are so many things we project onto an image. And there is, on the one hand, there is the stuff that we see, which we know to be true, the colours and the shapes and the scene and what it is. And on the other hand, there's the things that only we see and only we know to be true, which is what it ignites in us creatively. Maybe it reminds us of something, maybe it inspires us to think about something in a new way. But whatever it is, there's different ways to look at an image. And I feel like in terms of visual literacy education, I feel like, you know, it's possible that something could be lost in that if we take the text away, and if we don't think of it as a complete part of our language. So, in terms of my children's publishing work, I do have this side of my business which does adult publishing. It's called the Curved House, and I work primarily for publishers. Curved House Kids started a year ago with the launch of 4 books, which are on your tables. The idea was to kind of, I suppose, extend my own love of artist books and a desire to make people love books again into the realm of children's publishing. I felt working for other publishers and being involved in things like there's a Waterstones Children's Book Prize that we do the video for each year, and there's various other campaigns and things that go on that we are involved in as a publishing business. And I felt increasingly frustrated that publishers weren't really working very hard to make books that interact and communicate with children in the way that children are communicating with the world. And that has changed, and there's no doubt about that. There are shorter attention spans, there's a lot more competition, books and reading is dropping off, the levels are dropping off. So I was frustrated about why people weren't making books that could be, I suppose, used and kept and remembered and interacted with, and that ultimately empower young readers in the way that using a device does or playing a game does. There's an empowerment factor there that I think is missing from a lot of children's books. So I launched 4 titles. The first 2 there should be one of each on your table, but when you leave, I invite you to come and take whichever one you want, or 2.
Thank you.
Very welcome. I hope you've got some enthusiastic kids to scribble. The first types of books have a story but no illustrations, so the kids illustrate the books themselves. This is a couple of covers that some of the images are not very good, I'm sorry about that, but I rely on parents and teachers emailing me pictures, so this is how they come to me. So that's a couple that were done by some kids actually in Berlin, and that's an example of an interior page. And then the other type of book has illustrations but no story. So with these ones, which you can see on your table, the kids have to interpret what's happening in the illustrations and write their own story. So this is little Mia working very hard on hers. She is 5, I generally say the books are really most effective for kids at age 5 and 6, but they're also still really effective for kids from 3 up. And I think because of the nature of them, because there are no words in some of them, or in others there are no pictures, they sort of have this general agelessness to them. But kids from about 7 to 8 upwards are starting to read chapter books, so they actually don't respond very well to the physical book. They see this as like a baby's picture book. So I usually, most of the work that I've done around getting them into schools and working with teachers for feedback has been around the 5 to 6 age group. So over the past year, since launching these books, I have mainly focused my attention on the UK and Berlin, and that's just because I know the UK and I live in Berlin, so and I go between the 2 places all the time. So it made sense to me to test the waters in those 2 places. I have done lots of workshops in schools, and I've spent the last year developing everything around the books. So as far as I'm concerned, the books are done and they are what they are, and we could continue to do more books. But what's more interesting to me is how we can use the books in a classroom setting that challenges the way books are used already in a classroom setting. And I'll share some of those ideas with you in a second. But the other thing I've been doing is developing them more in the direction of downloadable worksheets and reprintable materials. And I've had some conversations with Liz from TPS schools here and others this week about this, because this is something that has been determined by the feedback I had from UK teachers, who basically said, we don't have the money to spend on books that we can't reuse. So these can't become part of our core list in our classroom, but conceptually we love what you're doing. So, and the idea of, you know, integrating, interpreting illustrations and having to draw stories and meaning and vocabulary out of that, they love, but they can't afford the books. So I've worked a lot to develop materials along the same lines, and that's what I want to share with you today. I want to share with you my, I suppose, strategy that I'm using and some of the examples, and I would love your feedback because, as I say, it's all very new, it's only a year old, and I really rely on conferences like this and organisations like the IVLA to help me make the right decisions about how to take it forward. So the first thing I've done is think about the model that I want every single thing that we produce to conform to, and that is ultimately a model for integrated literacy. So to make, ultimately a reading scheme or something that allows children to, it teaches children how to read, to write and to see, all in one. And so I came up with this little Venn diagram. We all love a Venn diagram. And the idea with this is that everything we output, the curved house kids, starts with the subject that is being taught or the learning outcome. So it might be, the way I've been developing it so far has been very much aligned with the UK's key stage targets. There's key stage 1 and key stage 2 in primary schools. So I've been looking, with the help of Jenna, who's done a lot of research for me, thank you Jenna, I've been looking at what are the different topics and subjects that are being taught at all the key stage levels, and how can we create a worksheet for that or align our books with that. So the other 2 elements are the text and the visuals. So everything we output would always have an element of text-based learning and always an element of visual. And sometimes the text will be the initial prompt and the kids will have to output something visual as an extension of their learning, or it will be the opposite, just like with the books. So I've been thinking about, the sort of long-term strategy of all of this, and I think of it in 3 parts. So The reading scheme would sort of begin with establishing a toolkit. So setting children up with the basic understanding of both visual and text-based vocabulary. So to understand things like shape and colour, size and scale, opposites, which is what the monster book, if you've got that one on your table, that's a book about opposites. So the idea is you sort of establish at the very early stages, which in the UK would be Key Stage 1, that basic toolkit. With each of the books that have been produced, the 4 books, they all come with teacher's notes in which we highlight key vocabulary that can be found within the book, and then the visual clues that the teachers can use to draw out that vocabulary in a classroom setting. I've also been developing some completely random things that I think are useful. I'd love to know what you think. But this is actually a worksheet which is on your table, and this is another very quick exercise. One of the key stage targets, and obviously one of the things that children learn at a very young age, is how to read and interpret emotion and understand facial expressions. And it's very difficult for some children, it's easy for others. And I came up with this exercise recently, and I have not yet tested it in the classroom, but I did tweet it and Facebook it on our page, and I got about a dozen back of people testing it out, and they are hilarious. I'm going to show you in a minute after you have a go. But the idea is simply to make this a happy face. So with a pencil, draw on top of it, and has everyone got one? I do have more somewhere. Oh, here you go. There you go. How's it going? No pressure. No pressure. So maybe if we're in a classroom setting, I'd be probably saying to the kids, maybe you could think about the shape of the mouth and how you could alter the shape of the mouth. And you would obviously get the kids up in front of the classroom smiling, looking at each other. And thinking about maybe any little lines on the face that might indicate, or thinking about if you want to add some eyes, what would smiling eyes look like? It can be as abstract as you like as well. It doesn't need to be art. It's conceptual. Oh, do you want one of the worksheets? No. Oh, cool. Okay. You can download everything afterwards. So I'll make it all available to you. What's that?
Cyclops.
Nice. Nice.
They have to be
They're
happy
very
too.
happy. Don't think because you're all the way down here, I'm not going to come and check in. That's a nice size. You know how to do it. Yeah. How's your smiley face going? Nice. That's really good.
It's kind of trying to get
You know how to draw as well, don't you?
a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I don't draw.
That's good too. Come on, give me a little.
It's worse than kind of.
I was trying to figure out how to do it. It's quite tricky, isn't it? Yeah. It's really tricky. Yeah.
And it's hard to like go on top of it.
To go on.
What do you think is different? We also need to think of
Yeah, those lines are really actually, and like he's just don't, they're not there yet. So that's one of the things I teach them is to see how the face actually changes when they
Need to put a couple of kids in front of all these other kids and say, okay, smile.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll have people look.
Yeah. How are we all going? Are we feeling good about it, or is it
How about it?
you should see something. That's amazing.
You're really smiling. Some of your teeth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how do we all find this exercise? Who found it hard? And is that because you found it difficult to know how to adapt the face to smile, or is it because the face as a starting point is a little bit frowny, so it's hard to adapt? Would you say? Yeah. And yep.
The nostrils, now I see it, the nostrils were the eyes, and that would be totally off.
Ah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's the first time I saw it.
actually, yeah. Let me show you a couple that came into the kids. This is from two brothers.
Oh.
And
You have to be a child.
you can really tell how different those two brothers are as well. Apparently says cool monkey on the right. He's learning how to do bubble writing. And this came in from two 6-year-old girls who are friends. And the one on the right is really interesting actually. This girl on the right, Lily, last year we had a drawing competition. When we launched the books, we had a drawing competition. And she won because she actually has the most interesting way of looking at things, and all her drawings are particularly actually mature for a 6-year-old. That one's a bit creepy. And the thing in the middle is a pig, apparently. So on the left, the girl who drew this one informed me that this guy is very happy because he's a footballer. And I thought that was really nice because she was putting the happiness into context of something. And actually a couple of them that came back were in context. One had skis on and said something about looking forward to skiing holiday next year. So I love that it was taken out of the immediate sort of exercise. This is another one that came in from Fiora. I think she's also 6. And I like this because she just went crazy on the eyes and eyelashes, seeing that as being, her signifier for happy. So that's an example of an exercise that would be in the toolkit component. And it's very much a sort of, mono-focused exercise. So rather than there be a story that you illustrate and there's multiple things to do, it's just one exercise to learn about one particular thing. And so we have lots of different exercises that are all about shape and colour and so on. The next stage that we would move through to would be looking at more conceptual thinking. So I've got this little poem which I wrote myself, and this is one of the things that I take into schools with me when I'm doing just little half-hour workshops. I'll read it. Shall I read it?
Yes.
Or can you read it? Okay. It goes like this. All my friends are sailors. We live upon the sea, above the whales and sharks, and fish the size of me. We're just like other sailors, but we don't have a boat. We use our magic powers to keep ourselves afloat. Some of us have fins to swim from all the sharks. Some of us have magic lights to navigate the dark. And you, my sailor pal, it's time to get you thinking. What magic could you use to stop yourself from sinking? So the idea is, with this type of thing, is to get them thinking, I guess, extending what they learn in the kind of toolkit sessions. So we've got things in there like above the whales and sharks, so looking at above and below, and fish the size of me, so looking at scale. And then we're also asking them to think in a sort of conceptual way about water. What can you do? How does water change? What can you do to the water to keep yourself on top of the water? So, I mean, one of my favourite ones was some kid said he would have fingers that turn the water to ice, which is fantastic, and he had just watched Frozen. So I think that was where that came from. But a lot of them have, you know, the most fantastic ideas, and what an exercise like this allows them to do is think about an actual subject, again, so the subject might be water, and think about it in this conceptual way, and think about how they can then express that in an illustration. The other type of thing that we've been working on with the help of Jenna is picture poetry, which is, again, it's aligned, we've been aligning these things with the key stage target. Do you want me to stop talking for a sec?
Oh,
Okay. Again, this is aligned with key stage targets. So this particular picture poetry worksheet relates to a particular thing that kids are learning about at key stage 2. Anyone want to guess? If you can think about maybe what would be the things that links these 4 images together?
Mechanics, technology.
Along those lines, energy. So at key stage 2, they're looking at energy and what they look quite actually in depth at energy. And so this type of exercise allows them to sort of, in the first instance, look at the image and create visual links and try to understand what might be binding all these things together. Then we would ask them to come up with some vocabulary about each image. So obviously they would write clock, computer, car, fridge, but they might also write time, fast, slow, cold, and you know, things that they associate with those images. Then we'd ask them to write a poem. And depending on what literacy targets that teacher is teaching at the time, they could integrate stuff like rhyming and alliteration and anything else that they are actually trying to get the kids to learn at that very moment. And the last one I want to show you is, again, it's a little bit random, but I quite like it. It's concrete poetry. Has anyone ever heard of this? It's a little bit of postmodern writery exercise, I suppose. But some poets create something called concrete poetry, which is where the words are, or they use letters and sometimes symbols, which are fixed in a particular position to make a particular pattern. So the poetry itself is less about the words. Sometimes you can't even read the words. It's more about the pattern and the formation of that pattern from letters. So in this instance, we would ask the kids to try to think about what this shape might remind them of. So maybe it's steps, maybe it's a lightning bolt, maybe it's rain, maybe it's whatever. Allow them to sort of imagine what it kind of reminds them of, and then ask them to do a little poem with words that they associate with that thing. So they'd put one word on each of those lines and create a little concrete poetry. How do we feel about this one, by the way?
I like that one.
Yeah? Okay, good. Oh, I've got him in the wrong spot, but that's someone drawing the sailor thing. I just heard, did you just say you want to see some examples?
Of the concrete poems.
Oh, okay, sorry, I don't have examples in here. But we constantly put stuff up on the website and Facebook and stuff. Every time we go and do a workshop, there are loads of photos flying around. So please go and visit the website and everything and have a look. So then the third element, we've gone from our toolkit through to some conceptual thinking, and the third element would be the storytelling aspect, which for me is important because, as I say, I'm quite interested in the way that we use text and images together, and that how using either of them or both of them allows us to tell a particular story. In terms of learning and conveying complex things in a simple way, storytelling is a really, really powerful way to do that. So I really believe that it's also a skill that if kids can learn, they can really benefit from knowing throughout their lifetime. So in terms of the storytelling aspect, I suppose it's most obvious in the illustrated books that are in front of you, which all have a series of illustrations that do have a narrative that we've predetermined. Actually, it was amazingly challenging to illustrate books with no words, because it's not just a case of illustrating it the way you would if there were words. There are a lot of things we had to think about. We had to make sure there was complete continuity with everything. We had to make sure there were lots of visual clues that kids could pick out. We also did things like, made sure that there were things like different emotional states with all the characters so that they were learning about those things at the same time. We could integrate that into the stories. And also, there are little literacy things hidden in here. So, for example, at Key Stage 2, I think in early Key Stage 2, kids are learning that some words are not spelled the way they sound. So we put in palm trees. So, and we try to draw the kids out to use that in their story. So, looking again back at this model, this is the model that I've used to produce all of the work so far, and I try to stick to it really without, quite rigidly actually, because I think it's the only way to create a continual and effective reading scheme. I also see this spot in the middle that the arrow's pointing to as being the key, the sweet spot for literacy in terms of how we teach and how we educate kids who are digitally native. And one of the reasons for that is because some kids are, I think there are so many different variables with reading and writing and interacting these days. Some kids have access to technology and have phones from a very young age, or iPads, use them at home. Other kids don't have access to the internet at home. Some kids are further along than others. Some kids have parents who read to them at home, others don't. There are so many different factors that mean there's such discrepancies in a classroom when it comes to teaching just reading or just writing. And so for me, I see visual literacy as being a real neutralizer of all those discrepancies, and you can do one exercise that embodies something visual and something text-based and gives all the kids in the classroom the ability to find their way into that subject, no matter how they think and no matter what level they're up at. There'll still be discrepancies, of course, but at least it sort of evens the playing field a little from the start. So as I'm developing everything, there are a few principles that I try to stick to as well, and I just wanted to whiz through them before we have a bit more of a discussion generally, and everyone can come and take a book and have a good look at it. There are basically 5 principles that I stick to. One is I want everything that we produce to be accessible. So this is the whole purpose of creating these books in the first place, that all kids can access books, that kids who are severely dyslexic or have learning difficulties or actually are bright but bored or prefer the iPad, whatever it is, they give them an opportunity to interact with something and hopefully potentially love books. I also like the fact that the books are very, I suppose, they do cross over ages, and whatever age the child is, they get something different out of the books. So, for example, with this space book, this is one done by a kid who's 5 in Berlin, so hasn't had any formal literacy training. And she loved the exercise. I love her backwards 4. And this next one came in from a German girl who I think she was 8, maybe 7, 8. And she has meticulously written the whole book. And, you know, she conceptually, she really got it. In the book, you'll see when you go through the book, it actually does take, the girl goes up into space with these balloons in her hands, and she actually does go through each layer of the atmosphere, and there's little things in each layer of the atmosphere that indicate that. So if a teacher was particularly science focused and wanted to integrate some science learning and some stuff about gravity or whatever, that can all be integrated for the older children. The second thing is that that everything we do is empowering. I think in terms of education, I think you know, there is this horrible moment for all of us when we don't understand something and we shut down. And I think to be able to own something and personalise something is quite empowering, and it's a good way to get over that barrier of the shutters coming down when we don't understand something, because essentially it becomes our own. This is another couple of covers that kids have done with their names on. And one of the bits of feedback I got before I even published the books was people were suggesting that I do them as white clean books. And I was really, really against this idea, and I still am. And it's because I want the kids to have something that they own, that they made, that they can take away with them. And I think that's ultimately, you know, that's about empowering them to be playing an active role in the process of making the book. So they say, I am the illustrator, I am the author, and if I make mistakes, that's okay, but this is my book and it's got my name on it, and, you know, I'm going to share it, put it in the library, whatever. So, and this takes me on to the third aspect of the books, which is, or of the whole scheme, which is, I try to make sure that everything has some sort of process within it. And the reason for that is, actually, if you look in the inside of the books, you might have noticed the book planner. So all of the books have this middle section which has the whole book laid out for the kids to plan what they're going to illustrate. And in the ones that are illustrated that you write, they can plan, you know, by writing some key vocabulary, picking out colours that they might use or whatever, and also working out what's happening in the whole plot of the book. And for me, the idea that they might go from planning something to creating something, then to keeping and treasuring or sharing, is actually a really important thing, because it's the creative process. And I know an awful lot of people in their early 20s who are empowered by technology and have multiple interests, but have absolutely no ability to finish something. And it's partly, I think, because we've lost a little bit of our, emphasis on the creative process, and understanding that it is a process and that it takes time to get from one thing to the other. So that's what the book plan is all about. The fourth aspect is that these are collaborative. So I do have a lot of artist friends and creative friends, and I often rope them into doing things. And I try to pick, so the people that have worked on any of the stuff so far, these books and also the worksheets and materials, have all been people that can't just write and draw, but they can also communicate, and you can put them in front of kids and you can get them running workshops. And I think that aspect's really important too, because I love the idea that kids will have access to people like authors and illustrators who are actually doing these things in real life, and they're given an opportunity to actually collaborate with those people. So when they illustrate this book, they're collaborating with an actual author. And I think that's another nice aspect of the empowerment thing. In this workshop in front of us, this was actually the idea of Chester Travers, who wrote this snowman book. And what he did is, and this was at an event we had about a month ago, he brought in on his iPad lots of animal sounds, and he played the sounds to the kids, and they had to guess which animal it was, which in itself was really funny. And then he would show them a picture, and he'd ask them to pick out a defining feature about this animal, so leopard spots. And he wrote that down on a piece of paper. Actually, he got the kids to write that down on a piece of paper, put it in a hat, and did that about 15 times or something. So we had a hat full of all these animal characteristics. Then the kids all picked out 3, and they had to draw a hybrid animal that had all of those different characteristics. They were extremely funny. And we also had that day an illustrator, an artist friend who came in, Tim Armstrong, and drew some of the animals with the kids. So this is half his drawing, and then kind of there it's finishing off the drawing. We also do some stuff in schools. So when we go into schools and do workshops, a lot of the time we are doing things like this, where sending in an illustrator. Ben did the Grandma's Jungle Party book, and getting them to run the workshops, but they all run them with a bit of I guess at the moment it's kind of informal training from me about visual literacy and about the types of things that I want them to make sure that they do in the classroom. And the final thing is to make sure things are multi-platform, because although I'm a lover of books and print, I'm also a lover of digital things, and I think digital technology is exciting and, again, very empowering. So, and I also think it's a great way to hook kids in, to make sure that you're talking to them about the things that are interesting to them, and often that's digital technology. So one of the workshop ideas that we've developed around the books is to take them into schools, project them up onto the whiteboard, and have the kids write the book as a class. So they all yell out things, and they come up with ideas, they name the characters and so on. And then we take it home and actually make a book out of it in design, which is what we use to design the books, and put it up on Issue, which is a free document sharing website. Does anyone know about Issue? It's just a nice document sharing website that renders the book really nicely, so it looks like a proper ebook, and it's free. And the kids can then go and look at their book online and read their ebook online. So they're seeing the book go from a physical object in front of them to the whiteboard in the classroom to the internet as an ebook. And I'm not sure what it's like here in the States, but in the UK, that transition from one platform to another, or one medium to another, is a very strong focus, and they want to see a lot of digital crossover, things like that. I was just going to say about this one. Oh yeah, Jim Bob did parkour. Does anyone know what parkour is? Okay, so there was this kid in this class, and he was quite difficult to control, and he was really quite out there, and he participated in the whole class, but in a way that was quite disruptive to the rest of the class. And the teacher thought maybe he didn't take much of it in, but the parkour line was his line, and I thought it was a particularly good one. And after we did this session, the kids all went off to lunch, and I went and spoke to the teacher for a while, and the kids came back, and apparently this kid and another kid had been out in the playground making up a story scenario, and they'd run back into the classroom to tell the teacher about this amazing story that they made up, which was, you know, the same kind of thing that we've been doing. And so I thought that was a really nice, to me that felt really good, because that kid was particularly hard to engage, and the two kids that did that were the two reluctant readers in the class. So it was nice for them to have engaged in storytelling in that way. Even if they weren't writing it or reading it, they were still engaging with the process of storytelling. There's also, I'll just show you this one, because there's also stuff in the book about Again, key stage targets using dialogue and, you know, speech bubbles and things like that. They learn about these things, you know, and it's a continual scale with their literacy learning. So we try to integrate some of that into the books. There's all their little signatures dedicated to the principal, Mr. Jukes. So that's a summary of where I'm at, and I'm also looking now a lot, and I've done a lot of research over the past 6 months or so about where the UK and Ireland and Europe are at with visual literacy, and particularly in terms of integrating it in this way. What I can say is that I think visual literacy is still very much well, actually, I've used the turtle image because I feel like we're just poking our heads out a little bit in terms of visual literacy, that people are talking about it and teachers have been talking about it for a really long time. It's not new, it's been gestating in academia for a long time, but it's just starting to poke its head out into mainstream discourse, I suppose you could say. So we're seeing some campaigns in the UK like there's one called the Campaign for Drawing, and also the Big Draw, which is, I think, an international thing. There's people like Andrew Marr, who's a journalist in the UK who had a stroke and actually used drawing to recover from his stroke, and he is a big spokesman for drawing and for visual literacy and visual activities. There's also authors like Michael Rosen who are championing visual literacy, but the thing about it is they're all doing this, but they're not really talking about it in terms of visual literacy. They're not using that particular phrase as much as I think they could. And if all the stuff that was going on in this region, if they all started to use the word visual literacy, it would feel like there's an awful lot going on. So one of my challenges going back after this conference will be to make sure I make contact with all those people and I make sure that they understand, you know, how they can use the vocabulary that has been created to generate, you know, a movement, I suppose, towards this type of thing. So there are a couple of things that have happened on the other side of the world that I found to be really inspiring in doing my research. The Scottish galleries are absolutely fantastic. It's the same kind of vibe, I suppose, as Toledo in terms of that the galleries are seen very much as something that's part of the community and supported by the community. And the Scottish galleries run some really brilliant campaigns. This one's called Adopt an Artist, Running for Scissors. And what they did is they asked, they married up students from an art college and students from a teaching college, and they put them together and they challenged them to come up with new ways to teach their subject that used visual literacy. And so the two creatively they came up with ideas together. And so this is, on the left, this is an original painting of Edinburgh, and on the right, that's a puzzle that students made as part of their mathematics learning. I don't actually know the mathematic component of it, but I know that they made one piece at a time and separately, and then they brought them all together. And there were other, I mean, they had various pairings of teachers doing various different things. So there are other examples of that as well. There's also something called the Literacy Shed, which is a website that is created by a primary school teacher in the UK, and he basically started it as a way of creating a repository for all of the materials that he was collecting to use in the classroom. And he does a lot of stuff with visual stimulus. So he would get videos, he would get readings of poems, and he would invite, and he would go into his classroom and create lesson plans around multimedia and things like that to engage children. And there is just, I mean, there's so much material on this website. It's a little bit hard to find stuff, but I think it's outgrown him. He has huge numbers of fan base with teachers now. So they're the two I wanted to highlight, but I just wanted to mention as well, I have, what's that?
I just wanted to see, we have about 10 minutes left. I know
Yeah.
you said you wanted to leave some time for questions
Yeah.
as well, so.
Cool, I'm finished now, just about. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say.
You're welcome.
Oh yeah, it's back. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention was I've written a little report for the conference called Reading Without Words, and it's not very exciting, but all it is about 10 case studies of things like this that I've come across that are from the UK and Ireland that I've found to be quite inspiring and really nice examples of integrated visual literacy learning. So my mission from now on is about spreading the word, making sure people can articulate things in a way that perhaps, I guess, drives visual literacy forward, and obviously to create more books. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm very happy to take questions, and also I'm very open to constructive criticism. I have a thick skin, so if anybody has any thoughts on this and maybe what I could be doing better, I'd love to hear. Thank you very much. Questions? Hi.
Hi, I have a comment and a question.
Yep.
I was the one who said that I really liked the concrete poem,
Yep.
and the reason I like it is because I thought it was a creative way to bridge inner visualization and the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, when I saw that concrete poem, I thought of a ladder,
Mm-hmm.
and then immediately I thought of a poem, and my poem was just a short one. I climbed the ladder to reach an apple. So I thought it was a creative way to engage those two aspects. And then for the facial recognition exercise, I was just wondering if that has to be, or if that was developed with children with conditions like Asperger's or autism.
Definitely with those in mind, but not necessarily exclusively.
Right.
But I mean, I think it may even be a bit too difficult for, depending on where they are on the spectrum. But I mean, probably mild Asperger's would be okay with that exercise, but still, I think it's probably a bit difficult. It's also a little bit about, it's partly about getting the kids to understand what an emotion actually looks like, but also it's about helping them to understand how to draw that, because that in itself really reinforces a strong sense of visual understanding of something, so that they're connecting it with that emotion later on. So, you know, even kids who are typical kids who have no learning difficulties, some of them are still going to find it hard to understand facial recognition and facial expressions and so on. Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I think this is very creative, and I really like the idea that in the books you also allow the children to like rip out a page. How cool is that?
Yeah. Some of them don't realise. They feel like, you know, yeah, they're ripping apart their library books or something. Hi.
Hi. I just have a comment. I think it's a good vehicle for teaching empathy, because I have run into people in my clinical work. You just can't teach people empathy when it gets farther along in their life. And this would be a really good thing, a really good tool, even for mental health people.
Oh, great. Thanks. Hi, Liz.
Hi. I'm an occupational therapist, and the one thing I really like about this, and we're doing a collaborative study with the museum, is that I think people forget, you know, visual literacy, that you really have to be able to see. And there are children, and she came out and visited our classrooms, which are special needs and typical children, and there are a lot of children who don't have good perceptual skills, not IQ to clear up, you know, the ability to accurately see, but it's, they can't perceive the image the way you and I perceive an image. And I love the fact that she's got a hands-on component, because children really have to understand, or people have to understand, that shapes have meaning and see that and perceive it. So when you're actually, be a nice component, which I didn't came out to your books, but that art aspect of, which we do, molding things with Play-Doh clay, to really feel that concept and understand it, which is the same idea with head injured population, but then that drawing, so they can now perceive it in two-dimensional and start creating their story and understanding that a story has meaning. A story can start telling something, and I can create my story through my drawing and then tie those words to it. And I really, like it. And the children enjoyed it when she came out. And even our children who tended a little bit more withdrawn, who participated, and one, I think they were intrigued with her accent. And her kangaroo.
My kangaroo impression. I'll roll that out later for you.
But they sat there and they really participated in drawing, and the ones who had difficulty drawing, would whisper what they want, and we were helping them get that shape and developing that concept of here now they had an animal, and they were excited, and they wanted their teacher to see, look what I drew, with a different story we use. But it was really neat, and I really thought it was a nice way to bridge that gap so children can have a story to tell, put the book together in collaborative form. And I like the fact that they have their own book, and this would be a classroom book, and every teacher was excited with the idea.
Thanks. Hi, down the back.
Something just practical. You mentioned the 10 case studies.
Yep.
Are we able to access that off of Curved House?
Yeah, I'll put it up when I'm back in Berlin on Tuesday, but in the meantime, I'll just send it to TMA or IVLA or whoever, you, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah. But if you check after Tuesday, I'll be putting a blog post up with a roundup of everything. I'll put that report up, and I'll also put up all the worksheets and some extra ones that aren't up here. So feel free to, actually I should mention, feel free to download them and use them. And also I'd love to see what you do with them, and I'd love any further feedback if you take them back into classrooms or with nieces and nephews and children. And you have a different response, I'd love to know. So
And where's your website?
Curved House Kids. I'll whiz back to the start so you can see. But so before you go, I want everyone to come and take a book or two. Maybe you want to take one of each book so you've got both types. And also I've got some cards here. Where is it? There we are, curvedhousekids.com. Not yet. I'd like to. I'm kind of in very, very, very provisional talks with a German publisher about a partnership. But I mean, that's one of the areas I see the most potential actually is in either foreign language editions or English language learning, because visual literacy is already a really major part of English as a second language learning. So yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. The only thing is we did put Once Upon a Time in, I mean, if we had to put Once Upon a Time, it could actually already sell in a foreign edition, but thank you very much, everyone.